Hi, folks. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of the iWrite Radio podcast and videocast. Press conference today with Nicola Sturgeon. The Tory conference is ongoing. Stuart, you want to discuss a piece by Iain Lawson and Wee Doug's article, Wee Ginger Doug rather, his article in the National.
Yes.
Well, will we go with the presser first?
A bit better. We had a morning of anticipation, which was finally abandoned when the news came out that she wasn't actually going to make her statement about it's not going to be a lockdown. We need to come up with shorthand for that, but she's not going to announce what's not going to be a lockdown for Friday. Today, she's now put that off till tomorrow. She was asked why. I think we can guess why. She's probably still waiting to hear from London whether they can get any money out of London, not just for Scotland, but for Wales and Northern Ireland, before they can decide on some of the restrictions they bring in, because that will mean paying money support to some businesses.
Apparently, Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland are going to make a joint statement.
That'll be money then.
Asking basically for more money, which is interesting because I've just watched part of Douglas Ross, or DRoss as he's known.
Has he made another
DRoss? Well, he had the BBC SNP bad spot today.
All right.
And I only caught a little bit of it, but apparently, according to Douglas Ross, the Scottish government has the money to support businesses in a lockdown, which is kind of interesting.
So when did they hand them that money?
Well, apparently it's Scottish government money. You know how England gives us all our money? Well,
I thought we paid taxes.
It doesn't apply in this case. The Scottish government has its own money in this case.
Oh, right. So the Scottish government has now got to fund this COVID emergency out of its existing pocket money.
Exactly. So not only has he announced that the Scottish Tory party is a different Tory party to the British Tory party, and therefore can have different policies in Scotland to the Tory party south of the border, thereby proving beyond doubt the flexibility of the union, not in any way differentiating Scotland from England or the rest of the UK. So I have no idea.
Is he schizophrenic or something?
Well, he's got a serious problem about mixed messages. Because if Scotland wants to do something different, they've got to find the money to do it different. We should all be following a four nations policy. Scotland's got its own money, but because the Tory party aren't the Tory party in Scotland, they can do things differently.
I have been
clear as mud.
I have seen an ad on social media twice this week. Something about Windows, getting free money to get your Windows replaced. But it's break back or build back or something. Break back Windows, build back Windows. Now, if it's typical social media advertising, you may not have seen it because you know how it works. But a question I asked underneath it was, is this government, UK government money bypassing Holyrood? What's their new campaign called? They've got, it's no longer get COVID done, is it?
I've given up listening to Boris Johnson in England.
I thought you just watched.
Yes, I know, but I've given up listening to him about COVID.
Oh, right, okay.
Because I have no idea what the policy south of the border is.
But you want to carry on and tell us about what Boris had to say before?
Well, will we finish with the presser first?
Okay. Yeah.
All the questions on the presser were based around speculation in the southern news that Scotland was going to go back into a form of lockdown, which was known as a circuit breaker.
We are not going back to March, she said. And then she said it again. We're not going back to March. And then she said it again. We're not going back to March. So there, that's you tell.
What she did do in her introduction was list all the things that weren't going back into lockdown. So schools, travel bans, all that stuff.
Yeah, the schools will stay open. The NHS will stay open. The travel ban, no, we won't have that. And there won't be a lockdown. So the shops will be open.
Yeah.
So that's all right. You don't have to rush out and buy toilet paper after all.
So what she's obviously tried to do is alleviate the fear mongering from the papers.
I thought it was very informative because Jason Leach is good. I mean, they really, when he's going on, he's going to he adds extra value to the answers. I mean, he's not just there for window dressing, is he?
No. And he's also very good at when she hits the nail on the head saying, no, I don't have anything to add to that.
It's pretty clear that hospitality is going to be hit again. And Jason Leach, I'm not going to give. Can you remember the short list he gave of the reasons why hospitality is a target? And he doesn't mean all of
it. I mean, effectively, if people mix, the virus spreads. So if you mix in a pub, if you mix in halls of residence, if you mix in your own home with other households, you're going to spread the virus. We knew this. It's now a question of whether the government is prepared to shut pubs, basically.
There's a short list. She said that there was possibility of having a variety of Scottish national versus regional restrictions, which are what we've already got, to be honest, haven't we? The rule of 6 will continue. The app is still there. Home working is still recommended, and no home visits. We're not going to change that. So we know that's much we know. The rest is all.
But it's now back into at least 3 care homes. So is visiting going to be stopped to care homes?
That's a worry.
I mean, it's really, really, really difficult because it doesn't matter what decision, and this applies across the board to every government in the world. It doesn't matter what decision you make that's a positive for stopping the virus, it will be a negative on the economy or mental health or visiting your old granny in a care home.
There's one important thing I need to let the viewers and listeners, because we've got to stop a rush on people taking their car to the garage, because I need to take mine because my electric windows have stopped working. I spoke to the garage this morning and he seemed to think that we were going into lockdown again on Friday, and so he couldn't take any bookings for next week yet. But that looks as though that's going to be all right. So don't rush and book anything in the garage. Otherwise, I'll get delayed another week for my electric windows to get fixed.
Okay, right. That's a call out to the whole of the UK, by the way.
The whole of Edinburgh.
I think this is probably, having mentioned the whole of the UK, the most outstanding thing. I watched the Boris Johnson conference speech. So the most outstanding thing was this country has not been invaded for 1,000 years.
That's not true.
Well, it might be true of England.
Well, which country was he talking to?
Well, he referred to it as this country not having been invaded for 1,000 years.
England was invaded in 1688 by a Dutch army. Well, I say Dutch army, led by the William of Orange.
Well, he was invited in, was he not?
Oh, God, you've lived a life. How many revolutions they have somebody be invited in to lead? Yes, no.
Do I not vaguely remember something about 1066?
God, you said this is.
Was there not a French
invasion? The English
invasion?
go on and on about, but haven't been invaded since 1066. They were invaded in 1688. The War of 1688 didn't end until the Battle of the Boyne, and we know all about what happened because of that.
Well, the point I'm making is Boris was speaking to his English Tories.
And they still live this lie of not being invaded.
Well, he was
speaking... the Westminster Parliament that invited William of Orange to become king with his wife, because his wife
Who
was
was Scottish?
she was the daughter of one of the Stuart king, so therefore that made it legit to ask. At the moment they made that decision in the Houses of Parliament, Dutch soldiers were marching up and down the streets of Westminster with their guns. Now, if that wasn't a bit of pressure, what the hell was it?
Well,
they were being guarded by Dutch soldiers.
That's political game playing, which probably was exactly the same then as it is now. Yeah. Anyway, so Boris has jumped on every bandwagon going. He's announced that we're going to be the biggest, greatest, most fantastic green energy country in the world. Having said that wind energy couldn't pull the skin off a rice pudding not many years ago.
Well, it doesn't blow all the time, Tory.
Well, he's now announced that we're going windmill-tastic. That was his headline. The tens of thousands of jobs. So in effect, he's following Scottish government policy.
No, he's not. He's just come up with a list of Dominic Cummings' wish list. It's a wish list that Dominic Cummings told them to spout out. None of it is true. They don't. There isn't a word that comes out of Boris Johnson's mouth that is true, apart from the fact that I've got lots of children, and I'm not going to tell you how many I've got.
Well, it was a speech without any backbone at all, I'm afraid. But interestingly, we're going to beat the virus and all that stuff, and we'll have a world-beaten vaccine, and I promise, and this will happen and that'll happen, and we're going to build thousands of millions of billions of houses, and it's going to be a new road in every green field in England, and so on and so
forth. A new train, a new railway line to the Outer Hebrides, and a bridge to Ireland.
Just the usual. He obviously was trying very hard to get back to the old Boris, had several quips, none of which were memorable. So nothing new, basically.
He's actually read a speech, I think, because I flicked across the channels and it looked as though he had a piece of paper in front of him, in fact, not even a teleprompter.
Well, he was not impressive, is my view. And I'm quite sure that every Tory pundit from here to John O'Groats will disagree with me, but he did not impress. As I have to say, his lieutenant in Scotland did not impress. I think I've read an article by Douglas Ross today, 2 articles by Douglas Ross, and I've seen him on the telly twice. I think I might even have heard him on the radio. But he, like Boris, sows confusion. So not impressive at all. Stuart, cheer me up. Tell me what you've got.
Well, I'm not sure we've quite finished with the presser yet. What else happened? Things are not decided. That's the big thing, and then the big question was, why were things not decided? I have got my own shorthand now, UK4, which isn't the UK. It is simply the 3 first ministers and whoever in London decides to join them and tell them what to do. But I'm pretty sure that is the reason for the delay. What else did we find? Well, there was one person skelped. Who got skelped? Christine Lavelle. She always gets skelped. Guess who she writes for? The Sun.
Was this the 20-second answer she'd given in 14 weeks?
That's the one. But she always asks the same question. The 2,000 contact tracers.
All right. Yes.
That was promised. No, it was only ever promised by the Sun. But you see, the Sun doesn't care about things like that. The Sun says things, well, the first minister said this was promised. So that means that the next time the Sun talks about it, they can stick in the word promised, even though they just invented it.
Well, I remember vividly this being answered weeks and weeks and weeks ago.
Well, only 23 times.
Well, it was one of these. Why don't we? You only have 892 people employed in track and trace. Yeah, but we didn't say we were going to employ 2,000. What we said was we would have 2,000 people available for track and trace.
It's a pool. They have all these
Yeah,
professional, NHS people that are available to switch from whatever that, maybe they're just wiping down the,
switch from not doing 50% of the operations.
yeah, something like that. I'm sure they don't come off operations to do it, but there's a lot of people who work for the NHS, and I'm sure they can be switched to phone up a few people.
Yes, it was a bit dispiriting because nearly every other question was, tell us what form this new lockdown's going to take. No, I'm doing it tomorrow to Parliament. Tell us what new form this lockdown's going to take. No, I'm doing it tomorrow to Parliament. So,
So I invented myself a new bit of shorthand today because it's now become used so much. It's house to house. Obviously, I've just called it H2H, but that's house to house is now going to be continue to be banned, and so that will become a term that we'll hear lots
sense.
of.
Right.
When is this house to house ban going to end, and things like that?
Right, come on, move on, because it was informative, but the questions were lackluster today.
They were indeed. I think there were one or two interesting things today because we've heard. You mentioned Mr. DRoss, Mr. Douglas Ross, already. So you were saying that he made a speech, another one.
That's what it was. I listened to his speech to conference.
Okay, I thought he already did that 3 days
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, he did. That was the third thing that I couldn't remember why I'd seen so much of him. No, today he basically wants his cake and eat it. He wants to be different from Westminster while remaining the same, or at least supporting everything that Boris says. And he wants a magic money tree in the back garden at Holyrood, just like the one they've got in the Rose Garden at number 10. He wants the Scottish Government to find money it doesn't have to pay furlough that his party have decided must end.
He wants the money. He wants to be able to announce, here's some money from the Scottish Tories, not the Scottish Government, to spend on.
Well, what he wants to do is say
hydro.
that due to his pressure, the Scottish Government have had to come up with money. It's one of these ones where he will claim credit for having forced the Scottish Government to hand out money.
Would you not be better off just simply saying, well, I put pressure? This is what they won't do, of course, but what they should do. Because, well, I'm thinking of Alistair Jack. Do you remember when they first told us that they weren't going to shut down the Scottish office, even though it was totally unnecessary now that we had Holyrood? There was a time when that was likely. Anyway, Alistair Jack's job should be to say to the cabinet in London, right, we need some extra money in Scotland for such and such. Now that Douglas Ross is the leader, that's what he should be doing. Could he not just claim, I've pressured the Chancellor to give you some extra money to get on with this?
Well, I don't think anybody actually speaks to him of any import. He claims to have regular chats with the Prime Minister. But as Dominic Cummings runs the government, it's Dominic Cummings that he should be chatting to, and he's never spoken to him. So basically, he's ineffective. I mean, Douglas Ross is the guy that voted against free school meals in English schools, where he had no right to vote because of evil, and then has told the Scottish Government that Tory policy is free school meals in Scottish schools. Well, either you're a unionist and believe all things should be equal across the whole of the UK, or you're not. And he's not. I mean, either you are a unionist or you're a separatist. And most of the policies come out with separates the way Scotland acts from the way England acts.
Well, certainly Iain Lawson has written a wee piece about his speech about 2 or 3 days ago, which was blaming all the Tories in London for the reason why Scottish independence is so popular.
Well, that was his conference speech. It effectively, that was his platform to differentiate himself from Westminster Tories. And the way he chose to do it was by blaming them for the surge in Scottish independence support, because they were not paying enough attention to the
Apparently,
Union.
he's quoted as saying defeatism is rife.
Well, I think the pundits, the Tory right-wing press pundits, certainly seem to have moved on to the ground that it will happen eventually. It's unavoidable. I think it's almost, they're almost discussing a timetable. How long can we refuse a referendum and continue to plunder Scotland's fishing and green energy and oil before we actually have to crumble? That seems to
I
be
see
the
that
position.
Paul Kavanagh, wee Ginger Doug, who seemed to get carried away with himself last week and had a very long article which we barely mentioned. This week he's got a very good article. He goes on about the same issue. I think it's talking about how it is the Tory party that's causing the popularity of Scottish independence. You know, Gove's idea of strengthening the union consists of chaining down Scotland and putting greater restrictions on the right of the people of Scotland to choose a different path.
Well,
And he gives us history. You think about it, Cameron, the day after the referendum, what did he say?
yeah, no, he introduced English votes for English laws. But the problem here is that's the wrong way to look at this. What Gove and Co have done with the internal market bill is basically destroy devolution.
Yeah.
And they've put themselves, if you like, I think, into the position that the SNP are in, with the ability to turn around and say, oh, we can't do anything about this because it's Westminster. Now, Westminster are going to be able to do things that make them look good and blame the Scottish government for things that make them look bad. I think it's quite a clever move. But the devolution settlement has been blown out of the war, totally undermined.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
And I think if the Tories box clever, they won't do anything. Well, I don't think they'll be able to avoid it. There will be things they have to do in the first 6 months of next year, after January the 1st, that will impact on Scottish government decisions.
Well, it's not just the act. It's very. I mean, the Internal Market Act, which it soon will be, it is incredibly important, as you know, because it effectively allows any cabinet secretary in London to override any decision made in Holyrood. So, boom.
So it's not, and it has a democratic deficit built in, because policy made for England by English MPs, English votes for English laws, can then be used to change policy in Scotland under the Internal Market Bill.
There you go. So we don't even, the Scottish MPs are emasculated.
You don't even get a vote on it.
You don't even get a vote.
It'll be
English
English
policy.
Parliament
does to Scotland.
Exactly. And I've yet to see it mentioned.
It's unfortunate that it depends on what the Scottish media tells the public, and if they don't know about it, what they're going to say.
Well, I mean, it's blindingly obvious. I mean, the one I think about is the academies. Now, the Internal Market Bill, there are no academies in Scotland.
That's right.
No private schools of that nature in Scotland.
There was one attempt in Dundee and that failed.
Well, it's illegal in Scotland. There is no...
I'm not sure if it's illegal, but
no, there's no legal structure. You can open up a private school, but not in the way that they've opened up
The
in
academies
England.
are somewhere, but yeah, you're right. They run, but
Yeah,
they get public money to run these
they get
academies,
public
don't they?
money, but they're also sponsored by private organizations. And if a private organization decides to go to the government and say, I want to open an academy, so I want a level playing field, I'm not sure that they couldn't use the Internal Market Bill to do it. Now, that's education that has been devolved to Scotland before it was devolved to Scotland through devolution. We've always had a separate system.
Scotland, the brand as well when it comes to food.
And you get the next problem is the law. If some law is passed in Scotland, well, rather, if a law is passed in England that impacts the internal market, God, I hate saying it, will the law have to be changed in Scotland? So who decides that? Who overrides Scottish law? English law.
And a cabinet secretary and can issue a decree.
So
in London.
There's huge problems ahead. And I'm hoping that the Scottish government is going to engineer a situation that forces some minister to attempt to change the law in Scotland on a devolved area, so it can be shown to be what Gove denied in front of the committee that questioned him on this, shows it for what it really is. And they better get a move on.
I mean, you know that my view on this is it's the boiling the frog situation, where they're eating into the authority of the Scottish Parliament and thereby the Scottish government, which they hate because it's SNP run, bit by bit, so that the people don't notice.
And well, I don't agree with you. They've thrown the frog into a pan of boiling water, but it's in a dark cupboard because the mainstream media are not talking about it.
Okay, well, that's one way to explain why there isn't a sort of moral outrage and people hands round Holyrood already. But of course, we've got a pandemic on. I mean, the last time there was a scare about the powers of Holyrood, it only took 12 hours. It was from tea time on one day to lunchtime the next, and there were thousands of people all around Holyrood.
Outrageous. I see wings over Scotland.
I hadn't finished. What's his name? Paul Kavanagh. It's not just what they've done that is driving independence in England, which is driving independence up. It's also just what we see down there. You've got the inadequate Alexander Boris de Peville Johnson. They've allowed him to gain power. No checks and balances. This British state's unfit for purpose. And this is a state which Scotland can never be a partner in union with, because it's not, Scotland would never have invited, as far as I can see, anybody like that to put into power.
Well, that's not news.
It's an English nationalist government that's taken over in England.
I can remember a discussion in 2014 where Blair McDougall sat and laughed at the idea that we would leave Europe and Boris Johnson would be prime minister.
Yeah.
And frankly, I don't think anybody believed it in 2014 that Boris Johnson could be prime minister. I mean, I didn't. I just couldn't see how the Tories could put that clown at the head of their party, but they did. Mind you, I couldn't believe that we voted for Brexit. So,
yeah, I suppose you could be right. I can't honestly remember what I thought in 2014 about Boris. I suppose if you'd asked me, I would have said, well, did they really need to put Boris into power?
I think they felt after the depressing, 2 years of Theresa May, they needed something to cheer them up.
Something to laugh at.
Well, but he'd been foreign minister.
Well, they knew
and he failed miserably at that. So
he was mayor of London. But and he's still
didn't
got
do a
40,
great job there either.
he's still got 40% support in England. They still, I mean, there's a large section of the population in England still thinks he's wonderful.
Wish fulfillment. I mean, Fraser Nelson was on
Oh, I listened to that podcast
Joe
you were
Coburn.
talking about.
Now, Fraser Nelson was a cheerleader for Boris Johnson. The Spectator was a cheerleader.
He was ignorant on that podcast.
Oh, you listened to
at
it?
Least
Did you?
Daisley, yes, at least Daisley had a clue what he was talking about.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is a podcast. You'll find it on our website, I Write Radio, from the Spectator. A podcast I listen to regularly, by the way, just so I know how Tories are thinking.
Is that why you bleed from your ears sometimes?
Well, it's insightful. James Forsyth, in particular, is a dyed-in-the-wool Tory. No doubt about it. If the truth were to smack him in the face, he would still write lies. He has no idea, and about Scotland even less. But Stephen Daisley, the reason I thought it was particularly interesting was Isabel Hartman, who chaired the podcast.
K Balls.
Was it K Balls? I thought it was Isabel Hartman.
I know you said that yesterday. It says K Balls.
Well.
Just to prove I listened to it.
Right. Well, at the end of the discussion, which was about Scottish independence, she asked them what they thought the chances of Scottish independence were. Fraser Nelson hunkered down, stuck his head back in the sand, and said 30%. James Forsyth kind of waffled, ignored it. Stephen Daisley answered truthfully, there should be no referendum. No referendum. Not what's the result going to be? No referendum, because he knows yes would win it.
I did discover listening to that podcast that he's based in Scotland, which I didn't
Yes,
know.
aye. He's a Spectator's man in Scotland. I think he's a Spectator Scottish editor.
Anyway, so we discovered because that was mentioned. Also that James Forsyth only turned up for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think he was supposed to be on. I think he just walked into the office, judging by what was said. But it was interesting how, well, Fraser Nelson especially, it upsets me to think Scotland would become independent. Well, that's because you live in London and like shortbread. I watched him. The Spectator's got a Spectator TV thing now as well. And he was on that, and he's got a bottle of Lafroig, the expensive one, sitting on his drinks table. And I couldn't help but think, you kid on Scotsman, you still not to worry.
I mean, I went to London expecting to find the streets paved with gold when I was a young man. A lot of people did, and there are a lot of them, the ones that have become successful, think it's because they went to London, probably, not because they were Scottish. So I can understand the thinking behind a lot of these unionist Scots in London.
I never liked London, I have to be honest.
Oh, no, neither did I. I mean, goodness me, I lived there 3 times, and you'd need 100 grand a year to persuade me to live in London.
East Dulwich is very nice.
I can tell you a few nice places. I lived in Richmond on the hill. Mind you, I was homeless. I chose to be homeless, and in Bournemouth, which is another posh place, which you know as well. I was homeless in Bournemouth, homeless in St Ives, and homeless in Richmond.
So were you living in your car on the hill?
Oh, different. No, I didn't have a car on the hill. I was sleeping on floors. I never slept. Did I sleep rough in Richmond? I don't think so.
What was it?
Peter Bell.
Oh, I missed Peter Bell today. What
Just a little bit. We discovered yesterday that there will be a debate about a Plan B at the upcoming SNP conference on the 28th of November. The motion, as proposed by Angus Brendan McNeill and Chris McElemy, has been accepted.
This is the motion that states the preferred route is a section 30, but what do we do if we don't get it?
Kind of. It's well, let's have a talk about maybe in West we will, but it's not actually a guarantee that we'll go for a plan B. That's what I said. It's not what Peter Lavelle says, but what does he say? He's not convinced that it depends what happens between now and the conference, whether the motion gets turned into something with meat on it. It's a bare bones motion at the moment. It could be simply here's a quote that the managers of the conference, we might think of it as an exercise in backburning, sacrificing a little to protect a lot, take the discomfort of a debate on Plan B to avoid the pain of a debate which put Plan A under the microscope.
I think I would like to see an option in the SNP manifesto that essentially says we will ask for a section 30 on the first day we get back in office. If we do, if that fails to be agreed by the whatever date, we will then hold our own referendum. Plan for, go ahead, make the referendum happen so that the British government has to take the Scottish government to court.
I think you do have to force, one has to force their hand. It's got to be action by a brand newly elected Scottish government.
And they have to go ahead with a referendum as though they have every right to hold a referendum.
And that means that it has to be a firm commitment in the manifesto to act step by step, I would imagine.
That then forces the British government to take the legal route, which then allows everybody in Scotland to go, wait a minute, this is a democratic vote. We're not announcing UDI. We're having a referendum, and you say we can't have a democratic vote. Who do you think you are?
So what happens if they say no again?
That's what I would like to see happen. I would like them to say, well, I don't care whether you say yes or no, we're going ahead with a referendum. And if local councils refuse to adjudicate, set up the polling stations, etc., they go ahead anyway. And if we get a 90% vote for independence, the British government can then fight us for it. Basically do what Catalonia did. Because the British government has blown the devolution settlement out the water. And they have blown international agreements out the water.
So that's another lever, of course.
So basically,
at this stage,
there's huge arguments.
At this stage, I would like to see a decent debate at the SNP conference. That was the first stage. I'd like to see a decent debate on what is possible and what the position of the party, the senior people in the party is, and are they going to, I mean, what does it say here? Peter finally says here, Plan B is not an alternative to Plan A, it is a follow-up to Plan A. It really should be called Plan A plus. Plan B only seems radical because Plan A is so conservative, and I think he's right. I mean, I can see the attraction for sitting back and waiting for the down south to push more votes, more and more and more votes. But this government down there is not a predictable government.
I can't. I just don't see. I mean, if I was Boris Johnson, I would just keep saying no. What's he got to gain from saying yes? Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
So you need to be able to force his hand. And you need, saying no, saying now is not the time is an easy out for him. It was a clever move by May. Now is not the time does not say no. it says now is not the time. In the future, maybe. That's what that says. What you need to do is force the Westminster government into a position where they're prepared to go to court to stop a referendum. That's what that, and of course, my favorite alternative is simply to turn around and say, right, we want to renegotiate the Treaty of Union.
Well, that's surely got to be in the mix, especially if once the decided to question, well, to threaten to break the treaty with the European Union with regard to the withdrawal treaty regarding Ireland.
Well, I mean, what is the Treaty of Union worth if they're prepared to break international treaties? That's the first question. Then you have the question of, and it's easy. You go in and the first thing right at the top of the page is the new treaty states that Scotland has the right to hold a referendum on independence at any point the Scottish government at Holyrood chooses.
What new treaty?
That's when, if you were to go and renegotiate the Treaty of Union.
You wouldn't give the authority to any Westminster any Westminster government to decide whether or not Scotland can decide its own government.
Exactly. So that's your top line. And when that fails to be agreed, you walk away.
Well, we're getting there.
I mean, that's always been my position.
Peter finishes up. He says here, here's a good little line. Just maybe bring it up for myself. We're still talking about the need, what should happen at the conference. If ever there was a status quo that needed to be disrupted, don't forget who are the big disruptors? Dominic Cummings and pals, right? That's their keyword, disruption. And status quo that needed to be disrupted, it is the place where the fight to restore Scotland's independence is now and has been for 6 grinding years. This is Peter Bell. And he says here, the aim now must be to devise amendments to the PlanB resolution, which transform it into the radical resolution that's actually required. So, seems a reasonable plan.
Does he outline what his radical resolution would look like?
I don't think he wants to. I think I go with him on the idea that we should.
Kind of my problem with Peter.
Well, somebody's got to come up with that. I think I'd rather bring Elliot Bulmer in. He's really the expert. I mean, he's not only does he write constitutions, in the last few years he's certainly been involved in a lot more constitutions. He's the expert on all these countries that got their independence from Britain.
Well, I mean, none of them got it by asking for a Section 30.
Exactly.
Because none of them were an equal partner in a union that had to ask for a Section 30.
I'm glad you said that, Nori. That's a very nice little piece.
Yeah.
I think I'll need to quote you on that in the future.
Well, I think that's possibly it for today.
Yeah.
Anything else?
It's dry and sunny, and so as soon as I've written the bump for this, I'll be off it again. Thanks for that, Nori. Thanks for asking me on again.
Cheers for being with me, Stuart. Jimmy's working today. Those fans of Jimmy's that are missing him.
Yep.
And we'll catch up with you tomorrow, where there's, what's tomorrow? PMQs and an announcement from the First Minister in Parliament. And there'll no doubt be
PMQs, an announcement in Holyrood. And then she'll be in Holyrood again on Thursday, she said. But she won't be back in Butte House with the presser until Friday, she said.
Okie doke. We'll see you on Wednesday, folks. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Cheers for now.
Cheerio.